Hello, everybody. So nice to see you, everybody. And I'm not giving a talk today. I was just asked to introduce Tony Karam because maybe not everybody of you know him. So I feel very honored, very privileged that I can do it because above all the things I can say about Tony Karam, he's my friend for a few decades already, a very close friend. As you may know, Tony Karam comes from Mexico. And actually, he comes from a very prominent Mexican family of very prominent business, influential family in Mexico. But when he was a very young man, maybe even a teenager, he decided he will not go, into the steps of his father. He will not dedicate his life to business nor politics, but he will dedicate his life to Buddhism. So I think in those times, it was quite a shock for a family that he will not continue the tradition of what his predecessors grounded, and that's what he did. So he just started searching and looking for Buddhist teachers. And in that way, totally alone. A few decades ago, there was really no Dharma, especially on the Latino American continents. So he started searching, researching, traveling, and in this way he had a chance in the 20th century to meet with the highest lamas of Buddhism, of the 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and learn from them. And he was totally alone, very young and alone, and family very surprised, what is he doing? And in the year 86, in one of his journeys to the Himalayas, he met in Kathmandu at the Swayambhu Stupa in our Kamakaju monastery, in the Karmaraju Mahavihar, where Lama Ole and Hana saw for the first time the 16th Kamapa, Erangjo Pidoje. That's where he met for the first time Lama Ole and Hana in Tomek. And a very strong bond started between Lama Ole, Hana, and Tony Karam. And also I can say he was a very, very close and dear friend of Tomek for life. And a very, very strong bond. And as I said, even though he was developing and has been developing, still develops the Vajrayana Buddhism of the 4 different schools, he remained all the time so faithful, loyal, unconditionally loyal to Lama Ole and Hana. And even though he had all the other opportunities, also due to this loyalty, in the early 90s, when we traveled with Rinpoche Rinpoche, as you know, visiting so many centers that Lama Ole and Hana opened, also in Latino America, then by that occasion, together with Lama Ole and Hana, Rinpoche Rinpoche was invited, and that's when Tony Karam met Rinpoche Rinpoche. In the same way, like Lama Ole, 50 years ago, together with Hana, the moment they met Rinpoche Rinpoche, their lives changed. And of so many of us, yes, just Rinpoche Rinpoche was melting the hearts of everybody. The same thing happened to Tony. So this also reinforced his bonds with our Kamakaju school, and also with the Diamond Way students. And he had a wish in his center to build a stupa. So he had a wish that the one who should direct spiritually the stupa is Lopon-Tsechu Rinpoche. So Rinpoche started, but then unfortunately passed away. And again, out of his loyalty, one day, I remember it was August 12th, Tony Karam called me, and when I saw his telephone number, I thought, wow, he remembers about my birthday. But he didn't say happy birthday. It was just a coincidence. He told me, Maggie, we got the permit for the stupa. This I remember because I was like, oh. And then, so to say, he said that he would like no other but, again, Wojtek, who is the architect, and me, who helps, that we help in that stupa. No other people he would like to have involved. And then we helped. And then again, his wish was that it's the 17th Karmapa, Trinley Dorje, the one who makes the Rabne, the consecration. Even though I tell you, everybody wanted to do it. The highest lamas from all, and Rinpoches from all the schools. And no, he said he wants it done that way, even though his center is not like a purely Karma Kaju or not also Diamond Way, but always this loyalty, all these years, the cooperation. He hosted Lama Ole every year during, I don't know how long.
We've met
the POA.
With POA, you mean how long?
How many years?
The POA from 1991 onwards, almost every
From
year.
91 until few years, until Lama Ole stopped doing POAs, he would always host Lama Ole and request him to do POA for everybody who is like students of Tony, because he's, I also can tell you, one of the highest. When it started, when he was almost a teenager and he said, I want to dedicate my life to Buddhism, then with the time he became one of the highest authorities of Buddhism in the Latin American continents. Whenever there is in Mexican TV, press, even government, a request about something connected to Buddhism, it's always Tony Karam who is invited. So he became really a very high authority. He's himself a teacher. He's the founder of Casa Tibet, Mexico. There is some Casa Tibet branches in some also Latin American countries. So he himself with the time became also like a teacher of Buddhism, but still his loyalty to Lama Ole has been so strong all these years, intact, always there with both of them, always supporting them. And yes, and that's the presence of Tony Karam is the result of this loyalty to Lama Ole and to Hana. And yes, and as I said, he was a very, very dear and close and loving friend to Tomek. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Maggie, so much. Yeah. As Maggie was sharing with you, I've had a 36-year relationship, 37 years with Lama Ole, at that time also with Hana and Tomek, who became one of my closest spiritual friends over the years, and of course Wojtek, who has been behind all of our Stupa projects and is also behind, as well as Maggie, to a new initiative that we're about to embark on, I hope very soon, which is the construction, the edification of a second Stupa in Mexico, basically dedicated for Central America. It will be an enlightened Stupa in Cancun, at a beautiful park that's called Parque Cancun. You know, this part of Mexico is one of the most visited tourist destinations in the world. It is the most visited vacation center and what they call sea and sand destination, but also an archaeological paradise in all of Latin America. And the construction of a stupa in such an environment is something that would allow millions, literally, of people to receive, to be exposed to this extraordinary spiritual machinery or instrument that a stupa is. Very often, these types of edifices are described within the Buddhist tradition as those that liberate simply by seeing. And of course, we have to understand what that means. It's not a literal thing. It's not that you will become a Buddha simply by seeing a stupa. I wish, no? But what it means is that you're exposed to that mental impression. And that mental impression, when it is met with the appropriate maturation or maturing conditions, will allow that person to trigger some type of internal mental and spiritual evolutionary development that eventually will bring that person to enlightenment, to the achievement of the end of the Buddhist path. It is also believed that an instrument of this nature is a purification machinery that acts upon the environment. And as you have very probably heard, we in Latin America, as it happens in so many parts of the world, are affected by many different problems, and in the last few decades by organized crime, particularly by the drug cartels that in the last few years have become extremely, extremely powerful, not only in Mexico, which is probably their most important bastion, but also in Central and Latin America in general. So, as the Tibetans believed originally, when Guru Rinpoche visited Tibet in the 7th century, that in order to prepare this land to hold the Dharma, the sacred teachings of the Buddha, it was indispensable to appease or immobilize the demonies that had its hold on Tibet, and thus they built a series of stupas in the different parts of the land that represented the different parts of the body and extremities of these demonies. We also embraced this type of endeavor in order to try to appease the demonies that has taken hold of Latin America and of Mexico. So we first put a stake, which is the stupa in Valle de Bravo, at the heart of these demonies. And then we made the promise some 25 years ago, Maggie, Euopecenter, Rinpoche, Lama, and I, that we would continue with this appeasement process over the years. So we have two endeavors and processes and promises to fulfill. One is the construction of the Cancun Stupa, which will immobilize the lower half of these demonies. And eventually, we will also build a stupa in northern Mexico in the frontier with the United States that will peg the head of these demonies. So we hope that by that time, we will be able to vanquish her and all the negativity that she brings to our land. No? Of course, the big challenge is that this was done in Tibet by an enlightened master, Guru Rinpoche, and the task of doing this in Mexico has been laid on me, which is not the best of scenarios, no? But even though I don't have any realization, no, I have had the blessing over the years of knowing and establishing bonds and a very close relationship to those who have, like Euopecenter Rinpoche, who was the spiritual director of our stupa in Valle de Bravo, and is also indirectly, because this stupa will be built within his sphere of influence and of blessing of the stupa of Cancun, no? And also, of course, Lama Ole, who's not only and has been my dear friend and protector over the years. You can't imagine all of the battles that we have had to fight together over the decades, especially with regards to the succession of His Holiness Karmapa. You can imagine Tibet House is the official cultural center of His Holiness the Dalai Lama for Latin America. It was inaugurated by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama in July the 6th of 1989. So you can imagine the moment that I decided to have His Holiness the 17th Karmapa Thaya Dorje consecrate our stupa in Valle de Bravo. I almost lost my career. No, literally, no. It was a very tough decision to take. I knew that we could lose it all, no. But eventually, our protection field worked wonderfully well. I was forgiven. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama understood that I had this also very close spiritual relationship with the previous Karmapa and with the present Karmapa and Tsecho Rinpoche, and simply turned his eyes sideways and decided not to say anything. No? After they sent me a letter that if I did it again, no, then I would never be able to see His Holiness the Dalai Lama again. No? And of course, now I'm doing it again. But I think, again, His Holiness is of age now, and I don't think there will be any problem. I hope. Well, as Maggie was telling you, Hannah used to say that I was very courageous, but she didn't understand the situation. I was simply completely ignorant. Because if I had known everything that all of these endeavors would entail, I would have never embarked on them. I always say that the only reason why I dedicated my life to all of these things is that I didn't have the slightest clue of how difficult they would be. And it is true. If I had the knowledge that I have today, probably I would have never have done it. And the same thing happened with our stupa and now the stupa in Cancun. I get the sense that all of the obscurations and difficulties will not arise. That is a perfect example of the expression of my ignorance, no? But I'm sure that when they do, because of dependent arising and merit, they will also dissipate. And this will become a very important instrument, as I say, in the taming of these negative energies that have taken hold of the world and our part of the world in particular. So, as Maggie was telling you, I met Lama Ole in 1985, 86. I was doing circumambulation at the Stupa of Swayambhu in the Kathmandu Valley. And when I passed the monastery of His Holiness Karmapa, Lama Ole, Hana, Tomek, and Shama Rinpoche were there. And I had read, because this was one of the few publications that you could read at that time, almost 40 years ago, Entering the Diamond Way, no? So I had seen pictures of Lama Ole, and in my mind I always thought, this is a person in my travels I definitely sometime have to meet or establish some type of connection to, no? But I just left it like that. But wishes are so powerful in life. We have to be very careful with what we wish. Because wishes do come true, no? Everything is mind. Everything is mind-made. So, when you one-pointedly generate an aspiration or a wish, be it negative or positive, eventually it flourishes with the maturational conditions arise, no? So I was circumambulating the Swayambhu Stupa, and then suddenly I saw Lama Ole in all of his hippie glory at that time, no? He was wearing sandals and these faded jeans with holes, and this N70 type of fashion with bell tops, no? And I saw Hana and Tomek, who looked just like me, like a kid at that time, and Shama Rinpoche. And I immediately recognized him from his book. So I went running, and I said, I'm from Mexico. I explained my situation. And you know the nature of Lama Ole. Instantly, he embraced me with this bear hug that sent me into like an altered state of consciousness, literally, no? And at that point, I remember, at that point, I simply felt that we belonged to the same family, no? So there's a saying in Tibet, it says that members of the same family are very rarely born together, very rarely born. Members of the same Buddha family are rarely born in the same family. No? So we have to look for each other until we find each other eventually. But if those bonds are strong enough, they always mature and we always find each other. So I've always had this sense that we were together many, many lives, no? And ever since, 36, 37 years ago, that bond has been one of the most important and central pledges of my life, no? So, when we inaugurated Tibet House in 1989, and as soon as the Dalai Lama came to Mexico for the first time, the first teacher that I invited to Tibet House was Lama Ole. No? So he came in 1990 for the first time, and then the next year he gave the first POA in Latin America. No? He was that brave. Nobody knew anything about Buddhism at that time, and from that time onwards, he came every year, sometimes even 2 or 3 times a year. You know, at that time that was possible. He didn't have as much activity as he had now, no? And well, it's been the privilege of my life to sharing that journey with this incredible and wonderful spiritual friend who is Lama Ole, Hana, my dear Tomek, who was one of my closest friends in life, and of course, Maggie, who's now more like a sister than a friend. So, by nature, that means that you're all my extended family. Of course, every family is dysfunctional by nature, no? But I feel very close. I feel very related to the Diamond Way Mandala. And for some strange reason, which I cherish very much, Lama Ole has placed several responsibilities on me through the years. And one of them is these lectures that I give yearly here at the summer course at the Euopecenter. So this is a little bit about my situation, which I shared with you, not motivated by exalting my self-importance, but simply by trying to share with you this wonderful love story, that developed through more than 3 decades between 2 spiritual friends, Lama Ole and myself. So today he asked me to talk to you a little bit about a central topic within the Buddhist tradition, which is that of compassion, And I wanted to share some thoughts about this with all of you, and I'm going to try to speak not very rapidly so that the translators don't have such a hard time translating. And thank you all for the wonderful work that you do. So as you very well know, the empirical criterion in the Buddhist tradition, in the Buddha Dharma, for distinguishing between wholesome and unwholesome behavior is whether an action supports or undermines genuine happiness, both for oneself or for others. And for this to be useful, for this to be something that we can relate to with clarity, we must naturally identify the nature of this endeavor, which is the consecution of genuine happiness. And from that perspective, being able to recognize and to signal its counterfeits, meaning all of those different things in life that we associate with well-being and happiness, from which we demand genuine felicity, and which are only partial sources of happiness, but topics that we make the central, in a way, interest of our life. So, the essential objective of the Buddhist path sometimes is described as a consecution of enlightenment, isn't it? But in reality, enlightenment is seen simply as a means for the achievement of an alternative, but more important, more ambitious perhaps, and more elevated objective, which is precisely the consecution of genuine happiness. Now, this is an element of life that functions as a democratic principle in all sentient beings, in all of those beings that are endowed with mind and life. We all naturally look for happiness and the avoidance and transcendence of suffering, isn't it? If you think about it, everything we do, everything we think, everything we say in life is directly or indirectly geared at the consecution of happiness. But unfortunately, we're very often unable to distinguish the difference between hedonic pleasure, which means the type of well-being that we derive from sensory stimuli, and genuine happiness, which is a condition that doesn't depend on any external factor, but naturally arises in the individual when his mind and heart is in balance, when it operates in equilibrium. Now, genuine happiness is different from stimuli-driven pleasures. We may naturally derive enjoyment from all forms of sensual pleasures, such as attractive visual images, sounds, aromas, tastes, tactile sensations. But you very well know, as soon as we lose touch with these different stimuli, the resultant pleasure that we derive from them fades and eventually simply disappears. And the same is true, of the satisfaction that we may experience from being praised, from acknowledgement, from respect, or from being loved. So the acquisition of material goods, financial security, power, fame, in effect might lead to happiness. But what is the nature of that happiness? It is always fleeting, it is always temporal, and it is always unstable, isn't it? Likewise, we derive pleasure from intangibles, including, for instance, our professional accomplishments, our interpersonal relationships, our different intellectual endeavors or activities, even our aesthetic appreciation of the arts. And all such pleasures are contingent, naturally, upon transient stimuli that come from or are derived from the environment, from the interaction that we establish with different people, or from various physical or mental activities. Thus, when this stimuli ceases, the resultant pleasure that we get from them or derive from them also ceases. Moreover, if you think about it, there's no guarantee that pleasure will arise every time we experience such a stimuli. An object or activity that once provided satisfaction may cease doing so eventually. Take the example of food, As you very well know, because it's something that I've shared with you year by year, I have a very debilitating condition. I suffer from what it's called acute sweet tooth. So I love desserts, and especially all types of cakes. Just yesterday, I had 4 servings of Nedo Rinpoche's birthday cake. So I was telling him, because he's diabetic, that the true benefactor of his birthday was me, no? So, it is said within the Buddhist tradition that we basically suffer because we're dominated by a very profound condition which is called ignorance, not knowing what the nature of things. For instance, the fact that everything that we interact with by means of our sensory basis, everything, even though it usually appears to us as permanent, is impermanent. All of these different stimuli that appear to us as unitary are made out of parts and arise independent of causes and conditions. All of these stimuli seem to possess an intrinsic nature. In the case of cakes, we could call it cakeness. And we thus infer that they possess intrinsic qualities. And what would be for a perceptor such as me, given my conditioning, those qualities, deliciousness. No? So when I look upon a cake, especially a Bavarian, Austrian cake, which is almost intrinsically delicious, no? Absolutely and permanently delicious, I'm fooled by this appearance. So within me, the first thing that arises is a certain anxiety. Why? For instance, yesterday, there were 2 cakes. One, a very natural cake without sugar, especially made for Rinpoche, which I hoped he would really like and concentrate upon. No? And then there was this very little Bavarian, wonderful Chantilly cake, which is exactly made to my mental predispositions. I always say that the moment I achieve enlightenment, if I ever do so, and I'm able to generate a clear, pure land, it will be dotted, it will be filled with Bavarian cakes. Huh? So I was making wishes very secretly that Rinpoche would understand his condition and not dare taste this cake that was filled with sugar. No? But all through this process, there was a lot of anxiety because I knew that this cake was small, that the portions that were caught were also very small, only a taste. And I was very afraid that all the ones that are departing dinner with me would like it as much as me, and therefore I would only be able to have a little taste of it. And why was I anxious? Because that cake appeared to me in a distorted manner. First of all, it truly appeared as a cake, no? As if it existed as a cake from its own side, completely independent of my mental designation, no? Possessor of cakeness, and at the same time of this intrinsic quality of deliciousness, and thus a true source of well-being and satisfaction. So, interiorly, unconsciously, I inferred, if one piece of cake is able to provide me with pleasure and happiness, what would happen if all the cake was only for me? Naturally, that pleasure would be multiplied, no? And then I thought, and because I'm a special guest, there is always the possibility that I can ask for a second cake, no? And through my stay at BC, I never suffer from the exhaustion of cakes, no? But you very well know that this doesn't work that way. So what happened? I ate 4 pieces of that cake because fortunately, my wishes came true, and for some reason, almost nobody had that cake. So it was almost all for me, no? And to be quite honest, I was going to eat another 2 pieces, but modesty made me not be able to do it. I was afraid that Philip and his wife would think I was a glutton, no? And I even made plans of coming at night, no? And perhaps opening the fridge and very surreptitiously taking that cake to my room, no? I could always feign ignorance about who took it in the morning, no? But what happened is that I had a very tough night, no? I had big stomachache. I couldn't sleep very well. So, as very often happens in life, I was confronted with reality of the way things are, no? That cake is not, as it appeared at that moment, a true source, a genuine source of happiness. It was only a temporal source of happiness, no? There's no guarantee with you when you interact with any source, with any apparently positive stimuli, that it will always generate the same effect. And as we very well know, especially after studying the physiology of addiction, we know that every time you need more intense or vast doses of that stimuli, like you do with drugs, the first drug might generate a very powerful effect, and then you need 2 doses of that drug, and then you need 3, and then you need 10, and then it doesn't produce any effect, right? Or it produces exactly the contrary effect that you thought it would produce, no? Or we are also unaware of the fact that that object, that appearance, no, doesn't really exist objectively from its own side the way that it appears to you. Meaning that that object is not really even a cake for other perceptors. Because for somebody to be able to designate that collection of transitory parts as a cake, that person has to be socialized. He has to be conditioned. He has to be educated to see upon these parts a cake, and then to associate that with something that is delicious. The fact is that if you were to take this cake, for instance, and run this experiment and perhaps put it in a box, attach a little parachute to it, liberate it from a plane in the middle of the Amazon, and it landed in the middle of a tribal land where that cake had never been seen before, the Aborigines would not even be able to recognize that object as a cake. And perhaps you would visit that tribe some years later and you would see that cake in a shrine, being venerated by these Aborigines that received it from the sky as a gift from the gods, no? I was watching the other day this documentary on the Discovery Channel, and they were talking about this Aboriginal tribe in the middle of the Amazon who doesn't have the possibility of consuming any type of processed sugars. But you know, the body by nature, by biological necessity, requires some type of carbohydrates and sugars. So they were showing how they got them. And it seems that there is this worm that eats rotten wood in the middle of the forest, of the jungle, that the Aborigines are very prone to identifying, and then they take it out of the rotten wood, and it's really fat and transparent, and then they dislodge its belly, which is filled with sugar, and they eat it as we would eat the cake. And I was thinking, no, that they would have to shoot me to taste that worm, no? I mean, in all my senses, there's no way that I could even embark in the journey of even tasting it. I'm not that valiant. I'm not that courageous, no? And yet for them, This worm looks exactly the same way as yesterday my Bavarian cake. No? So you see, nothing and nobody possesses intrinsic nature, an intrinsic objective identity. Everything arises out of causes and conditions. So the objective, the final, you could say, endeavor of the Buddhist path is the achievement of genuine happiness. But the Buddhist tradition is very keen on distinguishing genuine happiness from hedonic pleasure, meaning that one that we derive basically from the relationship, the contact that we establish between our sensory bases, that is essentially the physical, the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, etc., and its objects, pleasant sounds and tastes and colors and forms, etc., and of course the sensory apparatus of mind and ideas and feelings, etc. But the limitation of hedonic pleasure, as I previously mentioned, is the fact that by nature it is temporal, or the perceptor that establishes a relationship with that stimuli is also impermanent, is also temporal. No? So we might run an experiment, and we might try to figure out what type of pleasure is the one that we have been able to actualize in our lives. So the cognitive experiment is relatively simple. What you should imagine, what you should try to do is conceive that all of the sources of pleasure that are now so important and central in your life were suddenly to disappear. Imagine that for a moment. Run that internal experiment. So I would have to imagine what would happen in a world without cakes, or what would happen in a world without friends or whatever. No? What's left? If there's nothing left, that's what you truly possess. No? And if there's something left, that is what is truly yours. No? Of course, the tragedy is that when we run this experiment, what usually happens, what we're confronted with, is that nothing is left. So we don't possess anything. Why? Because the source of our well-being is always placed on things, on people, on fame, on recognition, on cakes, and all those types of things, no? Now, of course, that doesn't mean from the Buddhist perspective that we shouldn't enjoy these things. All these temporal stimuli in life. I always say, at the end, we're Buddhists, we're not idiots, no? Being a Buddhist doesn't mean being an idiot. Being a Buddhist doesn't mean that you cannot enjoy a cake. But it does mean that you understand the nature of that cake and the type of pleasure that you can derive from it, which is always temporal. And therefore, there's no anxiety when you interact with the cake. Meaning that you're really able to enjoy that stimuli without the fear that it will end, or without the anxiety that somebody else will take that piece of cake from you, or without the demand that it will always give you pleasure, or without the fantasy that it really is a genuine source of pleasure. Because if it was, every individual that interacted with the cake would have to derive from that interaction exactly the same experience. And thus, the only thing that we would need to do in order to end conflict in the world is give people cake. No? So instead of sending weaponry to the Ukraine, the only thing we would need to do is send massive doses of this Bavarian cake. And instead of cannons firing cannonballs, the only thing they would need to fire is chantilly cream. And you would see the Russians waiting to eat that cream, and the moment that they tasted it, they would become completely happy and satisfied. No? And the more cream, the more that would intensify. No? And whoever you give that cream to, human or not human, they would react to it exactly the same way. But that is not the case, no? Because cakes don't have that type of intrinsic identity, as nothing has, no? So from the Buddhist perspective, then what is the source, not of temporal hedonic pleasure, but genuine happiness? It is said that the source of genuine happiness is a sane mind, a mind that is open, a mind that is calm, a mind that is clear, a mind that is intelligent. So, from that perspective, the Buddha discovered that genuine happiness arises from the depths of a mind that is calm, clear, open, intelligent, and it is not simply a feeling, but more a way of being present in the world without being thrown into emotional disequilibrium related to the different vicissitudes of life that we go through day by day. Of course, as I said, one can still savor the joys of the sensual world, of human relations, of meaningful activities. However, because we do not cling to these stimuli or things or people or circumstances or life conditions as a true source of happiness, an inner sense of well-being remains even when these external supports disappear. And we must ask ourselves, what is the probability that this will actually happen? And the Buddha said, there's no probability. It is certain. Everything is temporal. No? So the direct route to such well-being, from the Buddhist perspective, is the cultivation of what we call mental balance. And that mental balance is centered in the Buddhist tradition in the generation of 4 types of equilibriums, which we call cognitive balance, that is the first one. Attentional balance, that is the second one. Cognitive balance, that is the third one. And emotional balance, that is the fourth and last one, where compassion holds a very important place. And I will get to that in a moment. So let's start by talking about these different balances that are indispensable for the achievement of complete, utter mental health, of which genuine happiness depends. Let's talk first about cognitive balance. The term conation, which is a kind of abstruse term that very few people have heard of. It is used in evolutionary, contemporary Western psychology in order to signal the faculty of desire and volition. So the term conation refers to this faculty, that of desire and volition. And cognitive balance entails precisely desires and volitions that are conducive to one's own and others' genuine happiness. And cognitive imbalances, conversely, naturally, are ways our desires and our intentions lead us away from psychological flourishing, and very often confront us or lead us to psychological distress and emotional distress. Now, unfortunately, this equilibrium, indispensable for the consecution of genuine happiness, is very seldomly present in us normal, ordinary people. And we suffer from different expressions of unbalance, no? Which we divide into 3, which is a cognitive deficit, a cognitive hyperactivity, and simply a cognitive dysfunctionality. Now, a cognitive deficit occurs when we experience, for instance, an apathetic loss of desires for happiness and the causes of happiness. And this is often accompanied by a lack of imagination, some type of stagnant, you could say, complacency. The tendency of not being able to imagine faring better than how we fare today. So we don't do anything to improve our life conditions. We simply think that this is the way things are and we cannot change them. This very often functions as the trigger for depression that is so widely spread in our contemporary society. Cognitive hyperactivity, the opposite disbalance, is present when we fixate on obsessive desires that obscure the reality of our present. We are so caught up in fantasies about the future. We're so focused on our unmet desires that our senses are dulled to what is happening here and now. And this, unfortunately, is a very repetitive condition that affects us. We're always somewhere else. We're always in the future. We're always in the past. Our mind also is prone to several types of attentional disbalance, which nurture this type of affliction. It is very difficult for us to focus on a certain object and therefore also to focus on the present. A way of showing this, a very extreme teaching in order to draw our attention to this condition, was one that I suffered when I was a young student of Dharma in Kathmandu. So I was waiting for my teacher, Ujjayi Tulku Rinpoche, for him to come back from a puja. And I usually waited for him at the steps of his room, And sometimes it could be some minutes, sometimes it could take an hour or several hours, but it was the opportunity to catch him when he was going into his room and then maybe getting some private time with him. So I was reading this book, and suddenly I felt a terrible slap in my cheek. And it completely woke me up. I was completely shocked, and to my surprise, there was Tulku Ugyen Rinpoche. He was the one that had slapped me surreptitiously, and I was in shock, and I told him, "Why did you slap me?" And he said, "Because this is one of the only appropriate methods to wake you up. Because you're never present. Because you're always somewhere else. And life is that which passes when you're not present, when you're not attentive, when you're not awake. And even though you're very young, you have to realize that this that is happening at this moment will never happen again." And he used to say a very poetic thing. He used to say, "It is only for your eyes. It's for your eyes only. One time, never again." So this moment that we're sharing together will never happen again. Some might think, how wonderful, But I remember now, so many years after he has passed away, how terrible it was that I didn't take advantage of him because I was always somewhere else. So that type of tendency, it's what we call a cognitive hyperactivity, and it is also related to cognitive hyperactivity, always being drawn to these types of desires that obscure the reality of our present. And we are so caught up in fantasies about the future, we're so caught up in our own unmet desires that our senses tend to get dulled, and we're unable to see and attend what happens right in front of us. And what is it that happens right in front of us? Life. That is what happens. Life. It is not somewhere else. It is here. It is now. And you must be awake. In this process, we also may blind ourselves to the needs and desires of others. Because we're so drawn into ourselves, so obsessed with our needs and desires, that we conclude in a completely false and distorted way that we're the only beings in the universe that have desires and that have the merit to satisfy them. No? We think others are completely different from us. And if they have desires, they're not as meritorious as ours. They don't need to be met as much as ours. No? So if we want to flourish as individuals, we have to correct this type of condition. No? So it is crucial to recognize that it is not possible to cultivate individual psychological flourishing while we ignore naturally the well-being of others. Why? Because one of the basic elements of reality is the fact that everything is interdependent. And we depend on others. So if we are not conscious of their needs and their merit of being happy and avoiding suffering, we will also not be able to actualize these objectives in our own lives. So, according to the Buddha Dharma, the true sources of mental suffering are internal afflictions, such as craving, such as hostility, such as delusion. But it is so common for people to mistakenly identify the external objects, people, situations, as the sources of our misery, of our anxiety, of our frustration, isn't it? So craving, as it's defined in the Buddhist tradition, is an attraction for an object upon which one conceptually superimposes or upon one exaggerates desirable qualities. One of the most natural expressions of craving is romantic love. Isn't it? When you're in love with somebody, what do? Habitually, unconsciously, compulsively, you exaggerate that person's qualities. No? And you hide that person's limitations or defects under the rug. Isn't it? Or, even worse, we project upon the loved one qualities that that person really doesn't have, has never had. No? And simultaneously, we make that person responsible for our well-being and happiness. We even say it. You're the source of my happiness. I couldn't live without you. Which is stupid because you have lived without that person for decades. No? And it's also stupid because you will die and that person will not be able to join you in that process. Isn't it? And that person really seems to be, the source of our well-being. Of course, we're very acritical. So we never run scientific experiments in order to validate our perceptions. What we should do, for instance, is we should draw some type of questionnaire. We should question the family members, of our romantic partner. For instance, right before you get married, you should really interview the brothers and sisters of your wife. And if you're very courageous and dotted with a very sophisticated scientific mind, you should also question the ex-lovers of your wife. No? And then you should share with them your perception. And you say, this girl is really wonderful. She has all these qualities. And she is like the fusion of Indira Gandhi and of Pamela Anderson. And she also has this little streak of Brigitte Bardot, no? But I think she has the intelligence of Marie Curie. Very probably. The ex-lovers, and very particularly the kid brother of your romantic partner will think you're crazy. No? And will tell you, you're delirious. Your perception is totally, completely fabricated. You don't know my sister well. No? When I got married, my wife's father did that methodically. While we were dancing, in the marriage party, he meticulously laid out all of the defects of his daughter. And the reason he did that, he says, once you marry her and take her away, I will not take her back. So you cannot say you were not warned, no? So of course, at that time, I thought he was completely neurotic, a terrible father, no? But what do you think? After just some months, I found out that he had not been sufficiently precise. No? And of course, who do you think I made responsible of my suffering? My wife. And I told her, you lied to me. No? You never said you were this or that. And what she said, you never allowed me to say it. You were so busy projecting upon me so many demands and fantasies and projections that you were never able to see who I really was. And we do that all the time with everything that we relate to. We think that the world is responsible for our experience. And it is true, the world contributes in the conformation, the construction of our experience. As I always say, we're Buddhists, we're not idiots. Of course we understand the role that the world and its appearances has in the elaboration of the experience that we have of things. But it doesn't determine them. What is the determining factor in a sentient being's elaboration of experience? The mind. That's why we say everything is mind-made. This doesn't mean that my mind makes that speaker. But what my mind makes is the interpretation that I have of the speaker. And that interpretation of the speaker is not intrinsic in the speaker. If it was intrinsic in the speaker, the ants that live inside of the speaker would be very happy because they would know that their house is a rock bar, no? A paradise of rock music, no? But ants don't know that. For them, it's simply, their dwelling place. They don't know it's a speaker, no? That's why the Buddhist tradition says that we are dreaming our world all of the time. This is very often misconstrued, and people think that what it means is that nothing really exists. And that's not what the Buddha tried to communicate. What he tried to communicate is the fact that nothing exists the way it appears from its own side, independently of the individual's mental designation. You see? I always say that it is very easy to understand that if we approach it from the perspective of sleep and dream. We all go through this bardo, this transition every day. We all go to sleep and we all dream, whether you remember it or not. And when we go to bed and when we start dreaming, we can experience that environment in two different ways. We can be conscious of the fact that we're dreaming or not. No? When we're not conscious of the fact that we're dreaming, we're naturally unable to recognize the illusory nature of dream appearances. And we project unconsciously and compulsively upon them objective reality. What this basically means is that when you're dreaming and you're not conscious of the fact that you're dreaming, you think and you're completely convinced that the dream appearances exist independently of the person that is dreaming them, isn't it? And therefore, what happens? Those appearances determine your experience, and thus they enslave you. So you feel happy when you have a good dream, and you feel unhappy when you go through a bad dream or a nightmare, isn't it? And you truly think that what triggers that experience and what determines the experience are these appearances that you're unable to recognize as dream appearances, as not independent from mind. Now, what happens when you're able to transit the dream state in a radically different way, when you're able to trigger, to detonate within the dream an extraordinary cognitive condition, which is lucidity? When you're able to recognize the dream as a dream. The dream doesn't dissolve, it doesn't disappear. That's why we say within the Buddhist tradition that dreams are real, in the sense that they satisfy the most basic ontological criteria for reality, which is, we say something is real if it appears to at least one of your alternative sense bases, or something is real if it has causal efficacy, if it produces some type of effect. So we should question if dreams fulfill that criteria. Do dreams appear to at least one of our sensory bases? Yes, they do. To which of them? Essentially to the mind. No? Of course, when we dream and we're not conscious of the fact that we're dreaming, it seems that those mental appearances appear to the rest of our sensory machinery, no? For instance, when you see in a dream, you think that you're seeing with your eyes and you're looking at an object that can be seen. And in a dream, you can hear something and you think that you're hearing it with your ear and it's something that can be heard. But in truth, in a dream, our physical senses are dormant. The only sensory basis that is functioning is mind. But dreams do appear to mind. So they satisfy the first criteria of reality. No? The second criteria, which is something is real if it generates some type of effect, if it produces or manifests what we call causal efficacy. And it is true that dreams produce effects. They generate different experiences in us that can even transit to the waking state, that can determine what we feel. So they do have causal efficacy. So dreams exist. But what the Buddha says is that even though dreams exist, they don't exist the way they appear. And how is it that dreams appear to that individual that is not lucid, conscious of the fact that he is dreaming? They appear as if they possess objective reality, as if they existed independently of the dreamer, when in truth, they're completely dependent of the dreamer. So what happens when you become lucid in a dream? Essentially, you're able to understand, or you're able to very clearly see the illusory nature of dream. Now, the illusory nature of dream, as I said, doesn't mean that that dream doesn't exist, but it does mean that it doesn't exist in the illusory way that it temporarily appears to you, because it appears to be objectively real. It appears to exist independently of the mind that it is dreaming it. But when you're lucid, you recognize that those dream appearances don't exist independently of the dreamer. And because you recognize that those appearances don't exist independently of the dreamer, they're unable to determine your experience. And therefore, you're liberated from the influence that they generally exert upon you. So they don't become the basic causes of your well-being or of your suffering. Now, the Buddha said that there's no difference between the night's dreams and the waking state. He said that the waking state is in truth a very specific type of dream, no? And that we also transit the waking state very often absent of lucidity. So we're also unable to recognize the illusory nature of appearances of the waking state. No? Now, there is a difference between the waking state and the dream state. All of the appearances of the dream state are mind-made. They don't exist independently of the mind that produces them. It's all a mental environment. And in the waking state, of course, you cannot say that the lights, you cannot say that this stand, you cannot say that this bottle is made by my mind. They do exist independently of my mind. But the way that I, as a perceptor, perceive and interpret all of these things, that is mind-made. Therefore, we are dreaming this world. We are together by means of mental designation saying that this place exists as a whole. We're saying that this is a bottle. No? But we are unaware of the fact that that identity is illusory and temporal. Because if I was to open this bottle and simply introduce a little fish on it, it would become, a fishbowl. If I took this bottle and wielded it in this way, it would become a baseball bat. No? If I came into this hall with the bottle in my head, it would be some type of exotic hat. If I were to throw this bottle upon you, it would be a weapon. So where's the bottle? The existence of this object as a bottle is only temporal. It arises out of causes and conditions, and it completely depends on my mental and collective conceptual designation. That's why he said that the bottle is empty of intrinsic nature. Now, empty doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It simply means that it doesn't exist in the distorted way that you perceive it. It doesn't exist permanently because it's dynamic and always moving and changing. It doesn't exist unitarily because it's made out of parts. And it depends on causes and conditions. It doesn't have an intrinsic nature because its bottleness depends on your mental designation and the collective designation of others. And if you're intelligent, you would be able to understand that due to that, it is not a real source of happiness or of pain. And you would be free, of the addictive relationship that we establish with every single thing in the world. So, sooner or later, grasping and clinging to things, what brings in our lives? It brings disappointment. It brings anxiety. It naturally produces misery. And the cultivation of cognitive balance, requires naturally an attention of these mental afflictions and a clear recognition of the actual sources of happiness. And the actual source of happiness is wisdom. Now, wisdom doesn't mean in this context being able to recite by heart the Kalachakra Tantra. No? What we mean by wisdom here is an intuitive understanding of the way things are. And of course, reality is very complex. But what can we postulate? What is it that we can say characterizes the way things are? Well, at least three simple things. Everything is impermanent. That is the way things are. So if we demand permanence from that which is impermanent, we will suffer naturally, repeatedly, uncontrollably. Keep this in mind. This is not probable. It is certain. No? Nothing exists unitarily. Everything is made up of parts and arises out of causes and conditions. Now, this has many ramifications. For instance, nobody exists permanently as something. No? Right now. No? I appear in a certain way. And this is a very tricky condition, no? Very dangerous for me. I mean, look at my condition. I'm in a stage, no? The Buddha's behind me. a couple of thousand people in front of me that mysteriously think that what I'm talking about is interesting. So it's very easy to construe a distorted perception of my identity, no? And think, I am somebody special. I am a teacher, a Buddhist teacher, no? And then the session finishes. And perhaps I take a walk in town, no? And somebody's buying an ice cream and there's a big queue. But I have built up this identity. I've just come from this conference where a couple of thousand people found what I was saying interesting, no? And gave or projected upon me some type of authority. And there's this big queue and I want an ice cream and nobody moves. No? And after waiting for perhaps half an hour, I get to the ice cream stand, no? And they ask me what kind of ice cream I want. They don't know which is my favorite one. Automatically, no? And then when they give it to me, they ask me to pay for it. How terrible. They don't know who I am. No? Just minutes before, everybody knew what type of cakes I liked. All the cakes were given to me for free. No? And I thought I deserved them because this is my identity, intrinsically. But it's only temporarily like that. And that identity arises out of causes and conditions. In my case, the grace of Lama Ole. No? Nobody would recognize me as a Buddhist teacher in the street, no? There's nothing that says I'm a Buddhist teacher in all of the atoms of my body. And I guarantee that when I get back home, not even my children will recognize me as a Buddhist teacher. I'll be lucky if there's some dinner at home waiting for me, no? And probably my kids will say, you were absent for a week. How could you do this to us in the first week of classes of this year, no? They wouldn't see me that way, isn't it? And if I was mugged in the streets of Mexico City, nobody would think they were committing some very bad karmic deed because they were mugging a Buddhist teacher. That identity is temporal. It's relative. Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't function. I cannot use it. Of course it functions and I can use it. But it's not intrinsic to my person. So if you understand that, and really understand it, what is it that you can do? Something magical and marvelous. When this lecture finishes, what stays in this stand? That identity. And the moment I leave this stand, I leave it absent and free of the identity of the Buddhist teacher that demands enormous amounts of energy to sustain and maintain. So much energy that it exhausts you. And that is one of so many fantasies that we hold on to in life, no? The identity mother, the identity man, the identity woman, the identity intelligent, the identity victim. So many identities, no? I remember one time when I was with my teacher in Kathmandu, and there was a student, an English girl, that had many psychological problems because she had suffered through sexual abuse when she was a little girl, no? And she had victimized herself for decades because of that. And one day she came to talk to my teacher, to Tulku Rinpoche, and she was crying, and she was telling him what had happened to her when she was a little kid. And I remember Tulku Rinpoche told her, but why is it that this makes you suffer so much now? And she says, what do you mean? And he says, yeah, the body that was abused is not the body that you have today. The mind that was abused is not the mind that you have today. You are a completely different person today than the person that was abused 20 years ago. There's nothing left of that person. So then she says, but if that is so, what makes me suffering? And he says, you're clinging to that identity. Because you have built an identity of an individual that has been abused. And even though the people that abused you might have died decades ago, you're brilliant and incredibly efficacious at abusing yourself every day. When you say, I'm a victim. So she said, so what is it I have to do? And he said, you simply have to wake up and understand that you're not a victim. And you're not an intrinsically abused person. And that was yesterday, and that today is today. Now, this girl was very intelligent, you know? And when she heard this, she liberated herself from that. And she was not a victim anymore, no? So many years after, she was a nun. And many years after that, I was in Dharamsala. I was an event with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I felt somebody pulling my shirt, no? And I turned around and I saw this girl, and I didn't recognize her. Because at that time, in Kathmandu, she was very thin. She was anorexic. She had pale skin. She looked terribly, no? It was quite self-evident that she was suffering. And when I looked at her some years after that, she was chubby, radiant, looked happy, so much so that I couldn't recognize her. So I turned my back to her and I said, excuse me, do I know you? He said, Tony, are you kidding? You know, don't you recognize me? We spent so many years together. And he said, no, I'm so sorry. Who are you? And she says, I'm Maria. And then suddenly I remember who she was. And I, put together that persona with this one. And I compulsively said, but you were like this and you were like that. And she took my hand and she said, yes, but don't you remember Rinpoche's words? And I said, no, what? And he said, that was yesterday. Today is today. So, we also need to cultivate a second type of balance in order to achieve mental health and to claim its natural result, which is genuine happiness. And the second type of balance that we need to achieve is attentional balance. No? Now, you know that it is a central theme within the Buddhist tradition, the development of mental concentration, one-pointed attention. And basically, what the Indian contemplatives, because this is not something that only the Buddhists assert or claim, but also the Hindus, the Brahmins, and other contemplative traditions of Asia. But what they all sustain is the fact that a mind that lacks attention and concentration is a dysfunctional mind. Why? Because simply it is never present. No? And a mind that possesses attention and concentration is by nature functional. So attentional balance, including the development of sustained voluntary attention, is a crucial feature of mental health and, of course, of optimal performance in any kind of meaningful activity in life. And it is achieved by overcoming attentional deficit, attentional hyperactivity, and attentional dysfunction or dysfunctionality, to which human society at large is prone, not just individuals. Those, for instance, contemporarily diagnosed with ADHD. Attentional deficit is or hyperactivity or dysfunctionality is something that affects most of human society, or most of sentient beings, we could say. No? So attentional deficit is characterized by the inability to focus on a desired object for more than 3 seconds. Now you might say, that sounds easy. No, focusing on an object for more than 3 seconds is not a difficult feat to achieve. Well, scientific investigation thinks otherwise. What scientists have found by means of analyzing with different sophisticated methodologies our level of attention is that the common attentional ability of a human being, of somebody that has gone to university, not only an ordinary person, but somebody that is very well educated, doesn't exceed 3 seconds. So we all suffer from attentional deficit, no? When the mind becomes withdrawn, disengaged, even from its own internal processes. No, let's not only say that we're not able to attend to what happens outside of us, but we also disengage from our internal processes. And remember what the Delphi oracle used to say: know thyself. And if you know thyself, you will know the universe and the gods. That was the famous frontispiece of the temple at Delphi. No? How can you know yourself if you suffer attentional deficit? Impossible. You don't have any introspective ability, isn't it? Attentional hyperactivity occurs when the mind is excessively aroused, resulting in compulsive distraction and fragmentation. Now, this sounds complicated, but Sancta Teresa of Avila, a very famous Christian contemplative, described it in a very simple way. He described attentional hyperactivity as, she called it the crazy mind. We suffer from the crazy mind that is always going around, that is always distracted, isn't it? Attention becomes dysfunctional. Also, when we focus on things in afflictive ways, and we do this all the time. For instance, we focus and we do it with incredible precision, which means that we're able to do this. We're able to focus our attention. The problem is that we do it dysfunctionally, and we only, for instance, focus our attention on the defects of a person. And we do it very, very well. No? We're able to describe them with precision. We're able to draw up complete books and treatises on the defects, for instance, of our wife or of our spouse. And we ignore their qualities. That is a type of attentional dysfunctionality. No? A sex addict, for instance, may attend to other people solely as sexual objects. Or a salesperson, for instance, may engage with others strictly in terms of their propensity to buy a product. That is a type of attentional dysfunctionality. Now, attentional deficit corresponds closely to what the Buddhist contemplatives describes as mental laxity or sinking. Attentional hyperactivity correlates with what Buddhist contemplatives describe as mental wandering or mental excitation. And these imbalances are remedied through the cultivation of a word, a process that you very often heard about, mindfulness. No? The cultivation of mindfulness and the cultivation of metacognition or introspection. Now, one of the basic objects of meditational training is precisely the generation of mental stability, one-pointed concentration. And in order to be successful, to be able to do this, we need to strengthen two mental factors, two cognitive functions of our mind. One is called in Sanskrit samadhi, no? And the other one is called in Sanskrit samprajana. Yeah? Now the first one relates to that ability to draw your mind very closely and in a very stable way to the object of attention. And when you lose the link or the relationship that you have established with the object of attention. You are made conscious of the fact that you have lost it, and you bring back the attention to that object. Or when you forget that object, you remember that object. That is the function of mindfulness, of recollection, no? And then the second mental quality that you need to develop in meditational training is called introspection. Introspection is something like the quality control of mind. It's called also contemporarily metacognition. And the function of metacognition is the ability to draw the mind upon itself, the ability to attend to the mental processes, and be able to identify when the mind has drawn away from the object, or when the mind has lost clarity upon the object, and then apply one of several antidotes and regain clarity and concentration. That's called introspection. So one of the main objectives of the first dimension of contemplative training in the Buddhist tradition, what's called shamatha meditation. Shamatha means to pacify, and what we precisely want to pacify is the wandering mind, or the mind that is prone to laxity, or the mind that is prone to hyperactivity, no? And once that you're able to concentrate your attention in anything, and of course the present, then your mind is made functional. And when your mind is made functional, then it is ready to perform many other tasks. The mind will be free of both attentional laxity or deficit, attentional excitation or hyperactivity, and of course it can be used effectively for any task. And in terms of attention, the mind will become exceptionally healthy. Now, contemplatives who have become adept in such training report that a sense of inner well-being emerges spontaneously when the mind is freed from habitual tendencies of laxity and excitation, which means that when the mind settles in its own nature, a natural well-being arises that is not dependent on anything external, and therefore becomes one of the causes of genuine happiness, and not hedonic pleasure, which I have said repeatedly has the limitation of being temporal and relative. Now, genuine happiness also arises out of a third type of balance, this time cognitive balance. And the distinguishing characteristic of cognitive balance is that one views the world without imbalances. For instance, the imbalances of conceptual projections, or conceptual omissions, or conceptual distortions. Now think about this, because I think it's very important. Let's run through them again. Conceptual projections. Are they common in us? Do you project all types of fantasies, demands, and ideas upon the world and other people all the time? Or is it only me? No? Am I the only stupid guy in the room? No? How about omissions? Does that word mean something for you? Do we not see certain things because we're completely dominated precisely by our fantasies and our expectations? Do we not see certain things? In the Buddhist tradition, it says that Buddhas see everything as a pure land. What does that mean? Well, it basically means this. It means that they see things that we're not able to see. No? And why is it that they see things that we're not able to see? Because they're attentive. No? Now, people that suffer severe cognitive imbalances very often are completely out of touch with reality. For instance, people that suffer from some type of schizophrenia. No? Thank you. Let me put this here. Does it work like this? Thank you, dear. But from the medical perspective, it is very often thought or postulated that normal people don't generally suffer from these types of disbalances. But the Buddhist tradition asserts that we're all prone to different types of cognitive disbalances. For instance, the cognitive deficit is our inability to see what is presented, the appearances that appear to our sense bases, both the physical as well as the mental. For instance, as I said before, we're unable to perceive what is impermanent as impermanent. And we not only do that, but we project a demand of permanence upon that which is impermanent. No? For instance, the first thing that you say to a person for whom you feel romantic love, the first thing that you ask that person after you think that that person is the source of your happiness and well-being, you ask them if they will always be there. And they will always love you the way they love you. And of course, this is a stupid question because they will not always be there. They will die or you will die. No? And it's also stupid because if they could guarantee that they would always be there and they would always do what you find agreeable today, there's no guarantee that you will find it satisfying tomorrow or after tomorrow. Sometimes the opposite happens, no? I'm tired of you bringing me flowers every day. No? Couldn't you bring me some chocolates next time? When before you thought that that was the true expression of love and whatever, no? So following, as I said, a threefold analysis of mental imbalances, a cognitive deficit is characterized by the failure to perceive what is present in our fields of sensory experience and in our minds, the inability to be aware of our own mental states. We're completely blind to what happens inside of us. We don't have introspective abilities. That's a mental or cognitive deficit. Now, cognitive hyperactivity, the opposite, is that state in which we project all sorts of fantasies and expectations on people and reality that do not correspond to the way things are. And we're always doing that. And then finally, mental dysfunction occurs when we misapprehend reality through either defects in our senses or our inability to interpret things correctly. And of course, introspection, this ability that we've developed through the training of mental stability, is a very important tool to be able to recognize these types of mental disbalances, to correct them, and by means of that strategy to achieve genuine happiness. And finally, we suffer, the Buddha said, because we're prone to emotional disbalances. Now, emotional balance is a natural outcome of cognitive balance, attentional balance, and cognitive balance. But emotional imbalances can impair those facets of our mental health, naturally. An emotional deficit, or the disorder of emotional deficit, occurs when we suffer from a type of indifference towards others. Emotional hyperactivity is characterized by excessive or obsessive experience of elation and depression, of pride and hope, of fear, adulation, contempt, craving, and hostility. And emotional dysfunction arises when we react inappropriately to the conditions that we meet in life. For instance, you see somebody stumbling, an old person stumbling in a staircase and falling, and you find that amusing. That's an emotional, you could say, dysfunction. No? Now, these four, the Buddhist tradition treats these imbalances with a comprehensive range of methods for counteracting such basic mental afflictions such as craving, such as hostility, such as delusion, arrogance, envy, by means of the application of what we call the four immensurables. Have you ever heard about the four immensurables? That is loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and finally, equanimity. Now, these four qualities are called immeasurable for two reasons. The first one is that they're directed towards incommensurable beings. And the second one is because they produce incommensurable positive results in the person that cultivates them. That's why they're called the four immensurables, no? So the first one, loving kindness, is the wish that oneself and others may find happiness and the true sources of happiness. This is very important. The true sources of happiness, not the sources of hedonic pleasure, because hedonic pleasure is by nature temporal, subjective, and relative, and thus inconsequential with regards to the consecution of genuine happiness. So it's not only the feeling, the desire that others might be happy, but that they might identify the causes of genuine happiness. Now, what are the causes of genuine happiness? You know now, today. Cognitive balance, attentional balance, cognitive balance, and emotional balance. Those are the causes of genuine happiness. So, the cause of genuine happiness is not having a Ferrari. The cause of genuine happiness is not owning a bakery. The causes of genuine happiness is not having sex every day. Now, as Buddhists, does that mean we should not engage in these things? Remember my mantra, we're Buddhists, not idiots. No? Of course you can have your Ferrari. Of course you can have your bakery if you do not cling to them as true sources of well-being and happiness. And you understand their temporal and relative nature. Then compassion is the feeling, the desire for others to avoid suffering and the true causes of suffering. What are the true causes of suffering? What is the true cause of suffering? Cognitive imbalance, attentional imbalance, cognitive imbalance, emotional imbalance. In synthesis, ignorance. That's what ignorance is. Specifically, ignorance is related to cognitive imbalance. No? The inability to perceive the way things are. Whatever appears to your different sense bases. And the ability to understand the way it exists. The ability to discriminate. That's why the word that is used in Sanskrit is prajna, which means jnana, a type of intuitive understanding, and pra, which means very profound, intimate, that is able to discriminate between the way things appear and the way things are. This is one of the most important radical discoveries of the Buddha. And by the way, why is it that we call Siddhartha Buddha? No, we very usually associate the word Buddha with an enlightened being. But that's not what the word means. It's not its etymology. The word Buddha in Sanskrit comes from the Sanskrit root Bud, which means to awaken. So technically, what is a Buddha? An awakened being. And what does it mean to be awake? To be lucid. And what does it mean to be lucid? To be able to recognize the illusory nature of appearances. To be able to discriminate between the way things appear and the way they truly exist. And one of the major discoveries of the Buddha is precisely the understanding that there is a huge distance, a huge gap between the way things appear and the way they exist. Or simply the reminder to all of us that nothing exists the way it appears. and that everything and everybody has many different dimensions and exists in many different ways. I am a lover of books since I was a little kid, of the physicality of books. So I'm not very enthusiastic about electronic books. No, I like the physicality of a book. Still now, no? And one of the worst things that you can do to me is borrowing one book, and when you return it, having underlined my book. That's the worst thing that you can do. But you know why? Why that is terrible for me? It's not that you, in a way, mistreat the book itself, which is only paper, no? It's the fact that you condemn me to reading your book forever. Because every time that I read your book, when I go through whatever you have underlined, that's what becomes important and what gives meaning to the book. The fact is, the book, as everything, is a dependent arising. It arises not only from the book, but from the person that reads the book. The moment that the person reads the book, the condition in which he reads it, the mental states through which he's in transit, the life condition he's going through. So if you don't underline that book will be different books for me in different moments in my life, and will give me different messages and different teachings. So every person is like a book. They have different meanings, and they have many different dimensions. So when we, with attachment, we reify a person, that is the natural expression of ignorance. Reification, that is a fancy philosophical word for the expression of ignorance at freezing somebody, totalizing somebody. What you do to your mother-in-law, no? When you think of her as the incarnation of a witch, of a wicked witch, the wicked witch of the West, no? And you forget the fact that she doesn't exist entirely or permanently the way she appears to you. And even that appearance is not objective because it depends on the way that you interpret that person, which comes from what you're feeling and what you're going through in your life and your prejudices and conditioning, no? Because that person appears very differently to your wife, for instance, for whom she is her mother, or she appears completely different to your kids, for whom she is her grandmother, or she appears completely different to his husband, who is his slave, no? And even to you, she has appeared in different ways, in different moments. And when somebody confronts you and says, for instance, your wife says, "But why are you so negative about my mother?" No? Now, when you loved her before and you justify yourself, you say, "Yes, that is true. I cannot deny that. But I didn't know her well enough. Or she lied to me. And now I understand the way she really exists. And she truly is permanently, independently, intrinsically the wicked witch of the West." Nobody exists like that. That is a fantasy. And you can empirically validate that even in a day. How does that person behave when she's profoundly asleep? In a comatose state. Nobody is the wicked witch of the West when they're profoundly asleep. They even look nice. No? And nobody, even if they're talented, can be a nightmare 24 hours a day. They might be a nightmare 23.5 hours a day, but not 24 hours a day. It would take too much energy to do that. You would have to have a very sophisticated, one-pointed mind to be able to sustain that type of identity 24 hours a day. And precisely, you hold to that identity because you're prone to several types of cognitive and attentional disbalances. So you don't have attention. You cannot hold that identity 24 hours a day. So, from that perspective, understanding the fact that everybody wants to be happy, everybody wants to transcend suffering, is something essential to counteract the causes of emotional imbalances. Then we have empathetic joy, which is the ability to take delight in others' joys and virtues. The opposite of envy, when we find virtues or qualities in others and we envy it, no, and that brings us suffering instead of joy. And if you think about it, that limits our lives enormously. Imagine the ability to celebrate the qualities of 2,000 people. That would give me 2,000 chances and opportunities of joy and happiness. No? Instead of envying the qualities or virtues of others. And finally, equanimity, which is a sense of impartial caring for all beings. That doesn't mean that we think that all beings are the same, because they're not the same, not completely, but we understand they're the same in one particular aspect, which is fundamental in life. They're the same in the sense that they all want to be happy and deserve to be happy, and they all want to transcend suffering and deserve to transcend suffering. What's amazing is that each of these mental states has a counterfeit with which it can easily be confused. So, for instance, loving kindness can easily be confused with self-centered attachment and craving. And that happens to us all the time. Or, for instance, grief and despair can be confused with compassion. And hedonism and frivolous happiness are counterfeits of empathetic joy. And apathy and indifference are false facsimiles of equanimity. So when we skillfully cultivate the four immeasurables, each of these qualities can help keep the others on track. Hedonism and frivolous happiness are remedied with the application of loving kindness. Apathy and indifference are remedied with compassion. Grief and despair are remedied with empathetic joy. And self-centered attachment and craving are remedied with equanimity. So specific meditational practices are designed to cultivate each of these mental traits. But their efficacy depends in large part on the degree to which one habituates the mind to that worldview and achieves balance in the sphere of the cognitive, of the attentional, of the domain of the cognitive, and of course, and finally, the domain of the emotional. So compassion, is in a way the corollary of our lecture. And it is the precise result of the cultivation of these four different types of balances, from which arises a lucid mind that we usually describe and understand as an awakened mind, the mind of a Buddha. No? So I was thinking what I could share with you, a very small teaching of the Buddha that described this teaching with some precision. And I remember a passage of one of the sutras in which the Buddha says, the Buddha was once asked about what surprised him the most about humanity, to which he responded, the individuals who lose their health in order to amass money or material possessions, and then lose that money or possessions in order to regain their health or their well-being. Those who, because of anxiously thinking about the future, forget the immediate in such manner that they end up not living neither the present nor their future. They live as if they were not subject to old age, sickness, and death, and end up dying as if they had never lived. So in this very brief teaching is the synthesis of all I have tried very clumsily to communicate to you this afternoon. So let me read it again to you. The Buddha was once asked about what surprised him the most about humanity, to which he responded, the individuals who lose their health in order to amass money or material possessions and then lose that money or possessions in order to regain their health or well-being. Those who, because of anxiously thinking about the future, forget the immediate in such manner that they end up not living neither the present nor the future. They live as if they were not subject to all day sickness and death, and then end up dying as if they had never lived. So, I would like to end up my lecture sharing with you a very beautiful prayer. It's a very old Hebrew prayer, but it's universal, and it says this. And this is my wish for all of you, especially in these difficult times that we're all going through and humanity is going through these past few years. And it says like this. May your awakenings wake you up. And that when you wake up, may you always get excited about this new day. May the sun rays that shine through your window into each new dawn never become routine. And may you have the clarity of seeing and highlighting the most positive of each person that crosses your path. May you not forget to taste the food you eat carefully, even if it's only bread and water. May you find some time during the day, even if it's short and brief, to raise your eyes to the sky and say thank you for the miracle of health, that mysterious and beautiful internal balance. May you manage to express the love you feel for your loved ones when they're still alive. And may your arms embrace, and may your kisses kiss, and may your sunset surprise you and never cease to amaze you. May you arrive tired and satisfied at nightfall from the tasks you've done during the day. And may your dreams be calm, restful, and without fear. May you not confuse your work with your life, nor the value of things with their price. And may you not believe yourself more than anyone, because only the ignorant do not know that we are nothing but dust and ash. And may you not forget for a moment that every second of life is a gift, and that if we were really brave, we would dance and sing with joy, even when we become aware of it. And may these words be a tiny tribute to the mystery of life that welcomes, embraces, and blesses us all. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Do you want to
Yeah.
also take questions, or would you prefer to?
Whatever you guys want. Would you like questions? Yes, maybe some minutes. Possible?
Maybe you could just say we have two question mics in the hallways.
There's 2 question minds in the hallway right here, if you want to walk up to them. I don't know where they are, I can't see them, but they must be somewhere. Oh, there they are.
Hi, Tony.
Hi.
Very fast ideas through my head. Do you have a very good new word as a suggestion for emptiness? Leerheit. Ein anderes Wort. Maybe.
I didn't understand. Can you repeat, please? Sorry.
I ask you to give me an idea. If you personally, you, Tony, may possibility another word than emptiness.
Okay.
German Leerheit. I think it's not the best translation from Sanskrit.
I don't know German, so I couldn't say. Unfortunately.
Or in English.
Okay, so for me, a better translation of emptiness is openness. The fact that everything is open to different possibilities instead of empty, because we associate emptiness with something negative, a lack of something, no? The absence of something, or the complete unexistence of something. And what emptiness means is mainly it's basically the openness of something. That it has many different dimensions and possibilities, and it's always changing. So I like that better than emptiness. Thank you. For instance, in the Mahamudra teachings and the Dzogchen teachings, and our Lama Ole, always stresses the word space, no? It's a word for emptiness. It's another way of describing emptiness. Because emptiness is like space. It's filled with possibilities, no? When you say that person is empty of inherent existence, what you're trying to say is that that person is empty of a fixed way of being. He or she can be many different things, and in fact is many different things, moment by moment, no? When Tulku said to this girl, you know, you're empty of being a victim, what he was trying to tell her is that that identity is open to change. And the only thing that inhibits that change is attachment to that identity. And the more rigid that identity is, the more fragile it becomes. No? When I was a kid, my mother inherited several old things from my family. And one of the things that she inherited was this like punch bowl. It was a Vienna punch bowl made out of, it's a very famous, very thin crystal. It's called, I don't know how you call it in English. It's like, in Spanish they call it egg, like the eggshell crystal, no? And it was one of the family treasures. And one day, my brother and I, we were simply playing with a paper plane. A paper plane. And the paper plane flew down from the second story of our house and hit the punch bowl of my mother. And the punch bowl flew into a myriad pieces. No? But my mother was a very tolerant lady. So instead of, making a scene and really punishing us, what she did is she substituted this punch bowl, very fragile because of its rigidity, with a plastic punch bowl. And we were never able to destroy it again because it's flexible. So if you're flexible, you're undestroyable. If you're rigid, you're prone to suffering and pain, and you're destroyable. No?
Tony?
Yes?
Up here. The question is that, of course, you are illustrated in a very detailed way about how we idealize partners, etc. But actually, after a while, we see them as they are. So we here, always was infused about the view, about behaving like a Buddha until to become one. So we have this, our own, in a way, teachings, but I would like to hear you, how you combine this behaving a Buddha and to see everything pure and the qualities in people together with what you mentioned before.
Exactly.
That because maybe you would be able to brief us a little bit what you think about it.
Very good question.
I know, thank you.
One of my first teachers of Tibetan, was the father of Western Tibetology. Very famous and extraordinary academician called Jeffrey Hopkins, Paul Jeffrey Hopkins. He was one of my first teachers in Tibet. And Jeffrey was the student of one of the most extraordinary early Tibetan Lamas to arrive in the West. He was a Gelugpa Lama, but he came from a Nyingma family. And he was not only a great academic and erudite, but he was a realized Buddhist master. And he was a sorcerer also, a very extraordinary man. He was called Geshe Wangyal. Geshe Wangyal established the first Buddhist monastery in the West, in the United States. He bought a little house. He was a Kalmyk Mongol who, during the Second World War, helped the Allies with gathering intelligence from the Axis during the war. And then during the purges of Stalin, was allowed to flee the Soviet Union and to resettle in the United States with a group of Mongol Kalmyks that were allowed to flee from Russia. And he bought this little house in Virginia and named it the first Kalmyk Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist monastery of America. And he became the teacher of the first generation of the greatest or the most important Tibetologists in the West. He was the teacher of Jeffrey Hopkins. He was the teacher of Alex Berzin. He was the teacher of Jonathan Landau. He was the teacher of Bob Thurman, Robert Thurman, of all of these fathers of Tibetology. Jeffrey is somebody gifted with an incredible diligence and intelligence. So when he decided that he wanted to study with Geshe Wangyal, he was a student at the University of Harvard. He was a classmate with Jeffrey Hopkins, with Bob Thurman. They both decided to suspend their studies at Harvard, their PhD at Harvard temporarily, to become students of Geshe Wangyal and live with him and learn with him. But the thing is that at that early age, in the early 50s, Tibetan wasn't a language that was taught anywhere, in any university. There were no textbook to learn Tibetan. There was only one Tibetan English dictionary from the 19th century, no? So it was very difficult to learn Tibetan. And Geshe Wangyal didn't really speak English very well, not at the level to be able to teach higher Buddhist studies to somebody, no? So then he told Jeffrey that if he wanted to learn Tibetan, and he was sincere about it, he had to memorize this block of a dictionary, Sarat Chandra Das dictionary, the English-Tibetan dictionary. Now that is practically impossible to do, at least for me. But Jeffrey, within 3 months, memorized the whole dictionary, and thus proved to Geshe Wangyal that he was truly sincere about learning Tibetan, and he became his foremost student and the father of Tibetology in the world, of Western Tibetology. So Jeffrey Hopkins loved Geshe Wangyal. He said, as we all usually end up saying about our teachers, that Geshe Wangyal was the love of his life. No? And he was always looking for a way of gaining his recognition. Now, in Buddhist studies, particularly in the Mahayana tradition, the most important topic of study is the understanding of emptiness, of openness, of space, whatever you want to call it, no? And from the perspective of philosophy, we use very sophisticated logistic methods to arrive at the understanding of emptiness. And this begins with the establishment, this is a technical phrase in Buddhist logic, of being able to recognize the object of refutation, being able to recognize the object of refutation. Now, recognizing the object of refutation is being able to become aware of how you're construing reality or your own identity in a wrong way, no? So we studied this topic for many, many years by means of analyzing the way things truly exist. For instance, analyzing the fact that they're made out of parts, analyzing the fact that they're dynamic and changing all the time, etc., etc. No? So one day, Jeffrey, who was a philosophical and who was a linguistic genius, wanted to give a present to Geshe Wangyala, who was turning 70, no? And what he did, he thought what he could do is repair Geshe Wangyal's house. The roofing of the house was becoming old and it was cracking and it was filtering water, no? So without Geshe Wangyal knowing, he spent all the summer, 3 months, rebuilding the roof of Geshe Wangyal. So when he finished, and he finished the day of Geshe Wangyal's birthday, no? He was filled with pride because he had done something marvelous for his teacher, no? And then he invited Geshe Wangyal. He said he had an incredible surprise for him. So he put this stair, no? And he helped him climb up to the roof, and he showed him how he had spent 3 months building this beautiful roofing, no? Now, by that time, Jeffrey had already received his PhD, and Jeffrey was the father of Western Tibetology. He was chair of the Department of Buddhist Studies of the University of Virginia, no? So he was a celebrity himself. So he showed this roofing to Geshe Wangyal. And Jeffrey knew everything about Buddhist logic and the intellectual understanding of emptiness. So Geshe Wangyal saw this because he was a sorcerer. He was a Buddha, no? Buddhas are sorcerers in a way, no? Because they understand the illusory, enchanted nature of reality in a way. The way that we see things is only an enchantment of our culture, no? So then he saw that Jeffrey was filled with pride. And in Buddhist philosophy, the first step at understanding emptiness is recognizing the object of refutation, which means recognizing how you're construing a reality that is a fantasy, in this case, your own identity. So then he started telling Jeffrey exactly the opposite of what he expected. He expected Geshe Wangyal to celebrate this roofing that he had made, no? And then he started saying, why did you change my roof? Why did you spend the money of the monastery in something that was not needed? And then with his batoon, with his staff, he started cracking the tiles and saying, this is not well set, and this one is not well set, and crack. And then Jeffrey started, and Jeffrey is completely Caucasian. So he's white as Snow White. And then when he gets angry, he becomes red as a plum, no? And he started becoming red, and then his eyes started being injected with blood, no? And when he was about to burst with anger, Geshe Wangyal exploded in a sorceric laughter. And he took his staff and he punched the heart of Jeffrey, and Jeffrey fell on his back onto his roofing. And he said, that is the object of refutation, you imbecile. The me, the mine. That is the object of refutation. Meaning, you've spent all of your life studying Buddhist philosophy, and you have not been able to recognize the object of refutation. So you reminded me of that when you said, I know. But seriously, your question is very good. What does a Buddha perceive? No? Well, two things. He or she is aware of the fact that every sentient being has Buddha nature. And that we have Buddha, that the basic essence of mind is enlightened mind. So that's what is meant when it is said that Buddhas see that everybody is a Buddha. We misapprehend this. And we very often do it in our own practice with great danger to ourselves. Because if you're advised to understand that Stalin or Hitler is a Buddha, that doesn't mean that literally he's a Buddha. It means that he has Buddha nature. But that Buddha nature is obstrued, is temporarily obstructed by mental afflictions, particularly by the dualistic mind. See? Even, to use the metaphor of dream, even when you're in a non-lucid dream, the nature of mind that is dreaming is not limited by the dream. Of course, you're not conscious of that because you project upon a dream objective reality. But the nature of the mind that is dreaming is not affected by the dream. So when you become lucid, in a way, you're not developing anything. You're not doing something new. You're not adding anything to your person. You're simply taking away the obstructions that don't allow the basic nature of mind to be present. And that's what is lucid. So to begin with, a Buddha sees in all sentient beings the presence of Buddha nature. So that's why it is said that a Buddha sees in everybody a Buddha. Of course, we should say a potential Buddha. No? They have everything to be lucid. They're in reality lucid, but these obstructions don't allow them to be lucid temporarily, right? Also, a Buddha understands that those obstructions are the consequence not of some type of evil nature in the person, but of ignorance. And they also understand that that ignorance is temporal and can be removed. No? It's like if you were able to go into a dream, the dream of somebody else, no? And you saw that person being completely afraid. If that dream was a dream in the middle of an African savanna, and you saw that there was a lion running towards that person, and he was terrified and was running for his life, but you're lucid in a dream, and you know it's a dream, no? Then how would you see that person? You would know that he could not be hurt by the lion. That the identity that that person manifests in the dream is a dream identity, so it cannot be hurt by the lion. And you would try to wake up that person. If you were able to wake up that person, you would liberate that person from that fear, from those problems, from that anxiety, because they're all illusory. But if you were not able to wake up that person, because that person was very profoundly limited by the dream or into the dream, if you're a Buddha, what would you do? You would become a hunter, and you would manifest a gun, and you would shoot the lion in the dream so that that person felt safe. But at every moment you would know as a Buddha in the dream of the other person that the lion is a dream lion, that the person is a dream person, and that the hunter is a dream hunter. So the Buddha said, this is beautiful. The Buddha said that we all practice an illusory dharma to actualize illusory qualities in order to transcend illusory obstacles, in order to become illusory Buddhas. No? So, a Buddha sees this, sees the potential for everything and the absence of limitations of reality. And that's why it said, a Buddha sees everything as a Buddha, everybody as a Buddha, everything as luminous, all sounds as mantras. No? And how do we train to do that? Not literally thinking that Hitler is a karmapa, but understanding that even that person has Buddha nature and the potential for enlightenment. And that whatever that person does, even if it's the most evil thing, it's performed, done, dominated by ignorance. Because that person thinks that that will bring him happiness, and that person thinks that that will allow him to transcend suffering. Now, that wish has dignity. The problem is the methods that that person uses to actualize that aspiration. Those methods are distorted because his understanding is distorted. But who pays the price for that? Ultimately, that person. So a Buddha also understands that the consequence of that ignorance is suffering. So what does he feel for that person? Intrepid compassion. So there's no contradiction between what I've tried to share with you and the view of Mahamudra or Dzogchen. There's just different ways of talking about it. Okay? Yes?
Hello. Firstly, thank you for your amazing lecture and the clarity that you...
Somebody say, that is the object of refutation. When we are praised? No?
Well, it wasn't that great. I mean, no.
Exactly. Now, that is the object of refutation because I feel insulted.
It was good, but I mean...
Thank you. Yeah.
I do have a complaint.
Yes.
I forget which traveling teacher of all was presenting in New York, but I remember very vividly this very profound point in trying to differentiate Buddhism from other religions, and it was this idea that to be a good Christian, you go to church on Sunday 1 or 2 hours, and then you're considered a good Christian. Whereas, really, as Buddhists, we should be meditating in every possible moment.
To begin with, that, I think that is unfair. That is not precise.
Well, that comes to my complaint. Because it puts us under a tremendous amount of responsibility and energy. And you used this word of once or twice of like this tiresome almost.
Yes.
And listening to these 4 typologies of connotative, attentive, cognitive, and emotional imbalance, it reminded me of my very first experiences with meditation when I took refuge in 2007. I actually hated it. I hated it because I had never even took the most fleeting moment to see how busy my mind was.
Exactly.
And it was deeply confusing and troubling for me. After a few months, I got used to it, I think. But what I find troubling, or the responsibility that I think you're sharing with us on recognizing these 4 types of imbalances, it brings me to this question of ultimately, we are Western minds, we're people working in the Western context. This is the beauty of Diamond Way, in that we're taking the practices of the 16th Karmapa and the Buddha and applying them into our Western lives. How do we know that we're actually achieving anything on these 4 different imbalances? That's ultimately my question, but it's also just the responsibility of it is something that seems very overwhelming.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, to begin with, I have to say that what you heard about Christianity is not precise. Within the Christian tradition, it is not believed that merely by going to the church you're a good Christian. I mean, to be quite honest and fair, it is said that by practicing Christian virtues, you're a good Christian. And those Christian virtues are exactly the same as Buddhist virtues. the ones that we emphasize by the avoidance of the 10 non-virtuous actions and the cultivation of the 10 virtuous actions, mostly, no? So in that sense, we're not essentially different from Christians, but there is a difference between Christians and Buddhists. And that difference is that in the Christian tradition, development or the ability to gain salvation basically depends on two factors. Virtuous deeds, which are very similar to what we call in Buddhism merit, the accumulation of merit, and grace, the ability to take, for instance, Jesus Christ as your personal Savior and allowing Him to save you, because or what He represents or embodies to save you. Because in the Judeo-Christian tradition in general, that is, in Islam, in Christianity, and in Judaism, we basically are believed to be fallen beings. What that essentially means is that we're conceived of as beings that possess or suffer intrinsic limitations. We are thought of as beings whose nature is, in a way, fractured and can only be saved or reintegrated, or it can only be healed by means of the intervention of a superior power, which in this sense would be God or His Son, Jesus Christ. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, we are not conceived as fallen beings. Buddhists don't think of themselves as people or individuals whose nature is fractured. In other words, we know that we're stupid, but we understand we're temporarily stupid. No? Not intrinsically stupid, to put it in a humorous way. No? And we also understand that because we're the ones that have, in a way, generated our problems, our mind is the creator of our difficulties, ignorance, we're also responsible for the healing and the transformation of those problems. And that there does not exist an external power, superior power, that is able to heal or to liberate us from those problems. We are the ones that have to liberate ourselves from that. So that is a difference. And the third and last difference is that in the Buddhist tradition, even though it is said that to become a Buddha, it is very important to accumulate an enormous amount of merit, meaning virtuous activity, evolutionary positive activity, it is indispensable to generate wisdom. That virtue in itself is insufficient to liberate an individual. And I can illustrate this with a metaphor. No? Imagine yourself in a non-lucid dream. In a dream that you're unable to recognize as a dream. No? Now, in a dream, you can be virtuous. And in a dream, you can be non-virtuous. Now, there is a difference between acting non-virtuously in a dream and virtuously in a dream. If you act within a dream virtuously, the dream will be positive, beneficial, and will grant you temporal well-being. If you act within a dream in a non-virtuous way, you will experience anxiety and different mental imbalances, emotional imbalances, and that will generate a poor or a negative experience within a dream. So, from that perspective, what is best? To have a good dream or a bad dream? Evidently, it is best to have a good dream. But no matter how good your dream is, it is still a dream. So if you really want to resolve the problem from the root, it is not enough to transform the dream. What you have to do is you have to awaken from the dream. So from the Buddhist, thank you so much. From the Buddhist perspective, being virtuous is very important, but it's not enough. If you want to liberate yourself from samsara, You have to be able to become lucid. You have to be able to manifest wisdom. You have to be able to understand the illusory nature of appearances, meaning that nothing exists independently of our mental designation, particularly our sense of me, mine, and I. No? And that doesn't exist within the Judeo-Christian tradition. From the perspective of the Buddhist tradition, thus, those paths can make you progress on the path, but cannot lead you to the end of the path. To be able to achieve liberation, you need the application of wisdom. Now, the application of wisdom can be cultivated in many ways. Logically, intuitively, emotionally. So in the Buddhist traditions, there's many methods to arrive at that end. No? For instance, identifying yourself with a Buddha until you become a Buddha. Why? Because the most important limitation in the path, at the beginning especially, is the idea that you have of yourself. Let me illustrate this with a story, a beautiful story. One of my teachers, Gyatro Rinpoche, a very extraordinary Nyingma teacher, was once asked by one of his students, a Western student, he said, Rinpoche, why does it seem for Westerners so difficult to achieve enlightenment? And it seems to me that for Easterners, like for instance for Tibetans, historically, it has been relatively easy to do this, simply by numbers. Why is that, Rinpoche? And then Gyatro Rinpoche, who's a very venerated Lama, at that time he was almost in his 70s, he burst into sudden, unexpected tears. No, he started to cry. And we were all moved at that moment because this was a titan of a man. No? Like if you imagine the presence of His Holiness the 16th Karmapa, you can't imagine him crying. And if you saw him crying, it would move you profoundly. No? So we all became very afflicted and we thought we had done something wrong. And many people simply told Rinpoche, we're so sorry. No, we might have said something that upset you. Please forgive us. No? And then suddenly, as fast as he started weeping uncontrollably like a little kid, he regained his regal stature of an incredible yogi, this incredible presence. No? And then we asked him, why were you crying? And he said, I was crying because of the question. And he said, the only difference between Tibetans and Westerners is the fact that Tibetans do accept and think they can become Buddhas. And Westerners think it is impossible for them to become Buddhas. So the only limitation for us, the real limitation in the path, is the fact that we think we cannot achieve the end of the path. So I was weeping, he said, because I found that so incredibly sad, no? That you're unable to understand that the only limitation is the fact that you think that you cannot become a Buddha. Not only can you become a Buddha, you are a Buddha. No? Another anecdote of this nature that is very inspiring. When I was maybe 20 years old, I was studying at Arshedra in Nepal. And in my family, my grandfather was a very influential person. He was a Spanish immigrant who married a very wealthy Spanish immigrant in Mexico, my grandmother, and became a very wealthy man. No? He was very good looking, what we call a dandy, in Mexico, no? Always dressed impeccably in these tailor suits that he had made in England, no? A ladies' man, a terrible and wonderful influence in my life, both at the same time. One time he said, Tony, do you think that you can make love to every single girl in the world? I said, of course not, Grandpa. This is impossible. He said, but you can try. That was my grandfather. So I was studying at the Shedra, and news came to me that my grandfather had passed away. And I had been away from home for many years. And I felt terrible that I had not been able to see him and say goodbye. He was such an important person in my life, almost like my father, more than my father, in a way, no? So I was completely heartbroken, no? And Tukugyen, they told him this, and he came down from his room, and he embraced me, and he said, no, you know, Tony, your problem is that you behave as a person, and you don't understand the fact that you're a luminous being. And the tragedy of human beings is that we're luminous beings that are intent on simply being people. No? So you see, this will also pass. This is illusory. Death is simply the end of a dream and the beginning of a new reality. And then he said, and it is true that you've lost your grandfather. You loved him. But you also have this incredible karma. You found me. No? And I love you. So, we can see everybody as a Buddha. If we understand that every sentient being is a luminous being. And we understand that they suffer simply because they very intently pretend to be a person. No? So thank you very much. No? Thank you so much.
Hello. Hello. So Tony, on behalf of everyone, thank you. And of course, we may or may not have something for you to keep with the annual tradition.
Get ready for it.
From this cafeteria? Are you in this cafeteria? Here, please.
A compliment from cafeteria, only for you.
From Miss Cafeteria herself.
Amadeo.
And also, Tony, on behalf of our 3 international projects this year, we also have a little, there you are. We have a little souvenir. Every year we have different international Daimoe projects that we fundraise for as a group. And one of them this year is a big center in Mexico City. So I invited Amadeo to also say a word, and they had a little gift.
So not much to say after this wonderful lecture. We want to thank you, Tony, for everything you give, your presence, but especially your friendship. It dates back to the 80s with Lama Ole, and by extension to all of us. We appreciate very much you being around and with us. And as Jeremiah said, this is a little token of our appreciation in the name of the 3 projects, which Mexico is one of them. And the theme of it is always together. So it's a sentence that Lama Ole has said very often, but we want to point out that in the future, we would like to be always together with you.
Always together. Always together. You know, many years ago, there's a picture, and curiously, you have this picture in the exhibit of Lama Ole's life. In one of the walls, there's a picture of Euopecenter who has Lama Ole and me together like this, no? And that is a day when he made Lama Ole and me promise that we always would be together, no? And we made that promise, and we've kept it, no? Not only for this life, but for future life. And please, very soon, I hope, we will begin this other project, which is the building of our Enlightenment Stupa in Cancun. It will be a 22-meter stupa, the biggest stupa in Latin America. Everything from our side is ready. We're only waiting for Magi and Nendo Rinpoche, who's the spiritual director of the project, to begin the organization of what's needed to begin the construction of the stupa. But as soon as this begins, I hope it becomes an international celebration and that we all work for that stupa. Not necessarily financially, but we would like to have all of you at least make something that will go into that stupa. We'll let you know at the moment that is appropriate. Okay? Thank you. Thank you.
Tony, can I have a piece? Please. I also suffer from your condition.
Perpetual sweet tooth, wasn't it?
I remember. There's this beautiful story, no? Yeah. The last time I saw Tukugi Rinpoche, he passed away maybe 6 or 7 months after that. I was waiting for him, as I usually did, at the step of his door in his hermitage in the mountains of Kathmandu at Nagi Gompa. And I was reading this book. I was reading Arthur Miller's novel, A View from the Bridge. It's a very famous American novel, no? And then Tukugin arrived and he asked me, he used to call me Dr. Nightmare. That was his name for me, no? He said, so Dr. Nightmare, what is it that you're reading today? And I said, this wonderful American play called A View from the Bridge. And then he never showed any interest for these types of readings, no? But that day he stopped and he said, you know, that title is incredibly profound. And I told him why, and he said, because it communicates the spirit of the Bodhisattva. And I said, in what way, Rinpoche? He says, because the Bodhisattva is that being who has crossed from the shore of samsara through the bridge of wisdom to the infinitude of nirvana. And from the bridge, he's able to see all those beings that are caught in the turmoil of the water, of the rapids, that are so blind, sometimes they cannot even see or understand that the only thing they need to do to save themselves is to stand up because the water is so shallow. And yet they drown because they think it is so profound. So the view that a bodhisattva has of life is the view from the bridge. No? And he said, and you know, this is probably the last time that we'll see each other in this life. He was already sick. No? And he said, but I promise you, I'll wait for you at the bridge. No? And I said to him, Rinpoche, but can I ask you something? He said, you always do, whatever you want. No? And I said, can I bring my friends? And I said, I'll wait for you and your friends. So, this cape is for me and for my friends. No? So if you want, you can share it.
So, here you grab one, I'll take one.
Thank you. Thank you.